What's up, guys? Fat Archon here, bringing another 40k video. We're changing up a little bit this time. We're not doing an army view. We're actually going to do a bit more of a, Tactica. I think what this video will mainly be over, it's mainly going to be over, Nurglings, specifically. But, generally, it'll be about, Infiltrators and even a little bit, we'll touch on a little bit more stuff as well, scoring and that sort of stuff. The main focus will be for, newer players, maybe people who aren't very familiar with, tournament play or, competitive play. So, the main hope is that this is useful for people who are curious about that side of 40k. That said, you know, never hurts to have a refresher. Hopefully this will have some good info for even the experienced players out there. I would also love, if anybody has anything to add at all, or any other suggestions for any players, or me, myself, I would be very interested to hear it. So if you got any ideas, you know, toss it out there, guys. I'm always all ears. Regardless, so, like I sort of mentioned, this video will focus on Nurglings mainly, but does apply to other stuff, for Daemons especially, so Blue Whores also have Infiltrate, as well as the Deepstrike. That said, not many other Chaos armies have too much access to it, but we do have access to these, so essentially it applies to any and every Chaos army for the most part. So, Nurglings. Probably no secret, but I freaking love these guys, my little puss puppies. First of all, they're cute as hell. Like, come on, just look at these guys. Like, how can you not love that? On top of that, though, there's a bunch of reasons for why these guys are so good. On top of what we'll go over shortly, like what they can accomplish on the field or whatever, these guys are freaking cheap. These are probably the cheapest wounds to points ratio, in the entire game. So, a minimum size unit of just 3 is only 40 points, and that's 12 wounds that you're getting there. So that's already ridiculous. Before this video, so I did some of the math, and if, so they're battle lines, so you can bring 6 squads of them, which is awesome, I like that a lot. If you were to bring 6 max-size squads, it would be something ridiculous. I think it was it's 220 wounds, something like that, for only 720 points. You know, is that the most optimal thing ever? Should you really be doing that? Maybe, I don't know. Probably not, but even if you went smaller, so what was it? It was, if you brought 6 6-man units, that would be, so if you wanted to ally them or something, it's just under 500 points. I think it's 480 or something like that. And that would be 150 wounds. So that is pretty damn good rate. Imagine how much of the field you could block or cover with that many, with 36 bases or whatever. And then even then, if you went 6 men squads, it was something like 76 wounds, something like that, for 250 points. That's cheaper than most, you know, most melee assault squads or whatever. Cheaper than that, and you're getting 75 wounds or whatever it is. Hot diggity damn, that's definitely worth, considering. I'm not sure if you should do that too often, but, that's a fun idea in the very least. Speaking of, MSU versus Blobs, for Nurglings, and the way that I'm gonna recommend using them, and the way that I myself have been using them so far, it'll be fun to try that blob thing. Maybe there is, a hidden secret strategies and that, but I'm normally going to recommend you run them MSU. Main reason being is it just makes them easier maneuver. Wink wink, or spoiler, I guess, you can use these guys for scoring. One of the main reasons, if not the main reason you can use them is scoring. And so having a smaller unit size makes that infinitely easier. It's much harder for your opponent to screen certain areas if you have a smaller squad. Also too, the cheapness, 40 points, because these guys, they will die. Sure, they got buffed to T3 or whatever, but they're still gonna die pretty damn quick, so do be mindful of that. So yeah, I recommend running MSU. I genuinely do recommend 3 squads for the most part. Even then, just a single squad will come in handy. A single squad, assuming you didn't throw them away on move blocking or something, you should look at them as okay, that's probably 4 victory points right there. 4 or 5 victory points just from this one squad. So by having 3 of them, you can help guarantee that you're going to get more victory points, which obviously is what competitive play is all about, scoring more than your opponent. So infiltrating, that's going to be one of the main focuses of this video. Infiltrating has a whole lot of nuance to it. So a lot of what I'm about to say, or a lot of what I'm about to go over, heavily depends on the map, on the situation, on the opponent, on deployment zones, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, has a very, very big effect on how Infiltrate works. So do be, you know, nothing I say is set in stones. It's all going to depend on the situation, but practice makes perfect. You know, don't let that dissuade you from trying them out. They're not complicated if somehow that's something that you're worried about. Definitely, like, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better. So by having more of them, more specialized tools of that, definitely handy to have. Speaking of Infiltrate, so a lot of ways you can use them. The main one of the main ones I'll be going over is move blocking. Depending on the opponent and the unit, move blocking is like incredibly valuable. There can be times that alone will win you the game. If you're able to like completely hem somebody in on their first turn, like yeah, it might be game over at that point, assuming they can't like steamroll you after that. And with these guys being so cheap, you're really not giving up like that much to bring that ability. So that's the first one. On top of that, you got the other obvious ones. You got screening. So maybe it's not a good army to attempt to move block. And maybe, like, I don't know, you're already up on score, or whatever the reason is. You can still use them just for screaming. It's not the worst thing ever if you have to put them in the back of your deployment. Or, better yet, like maybe you're blocking off an objective or whatever because you know that they want to deep strike in. Plenty of reasons where that will be valuable. And then there's the obvious one, should be very obvious, I already mentioned it as well, scoring. Scoring is, again, that's how you win the game, like, crazy idea here, right? So scoring, I would say, is the most valuable reason to bring the Nurglings, and probably why I, like, rate them so incredibly highly, aside from being super adorable or whatever. And then also you got the old fallback of distraction. These guys are so cheap, like, you're really not going to care that much if they end up dying. Like, it shouldn't be that big a deal. And in fact, you should expect them to die after, like, first turn or whatever. Once you use them, like, they're throwaway, man. So if you can get your opponent to waste, like, decent firepower, because that's what's also, and one of the many cool things about them is, you know, you can't just throw a few bolters at them. You need to throw, like, real firepower in these guys if you want to actually get rid of them. So you can always run them as distraction. Maybe you don't give a damn at all what happens to them, and you just throw them off in some corner somewhere and hope that your opponent is, like, you know, new or not thinking straight, or maybe he's tilted, hopefully. All those reasons to hope that you can distract them with them. So, plenty of reasons why Nurglings are fantastic, and just Infiltrators in general. So the first reason, so move blocking. So, like I mentioned, very nuanced, especially move blocking. You need to figure in target priority and, like, target type when you're doing move blocking. So, by the way, so first of all, right, this is not the best map. I will lay that out here early. This would need way more obscuring, in my opinion. Like, I guess we could play with these being obscuring, and that would help a bit. I also, too, I don't like how if anybody moves into the center of here, they just, like, the entire map can see inside and shoot them. Definitely not the best map ever, but, you know, we work with what we got, so it's okay. But target priority and unit type. So I put in a variety of units here. This is not like a legal list even, I don't think. This one goes over on points because I want to bring a few different kind of units to give you guys an example. But this is a relatively realistic deployment. Like these possessed are Nurgling, or Nurgle, so they're not going to get shot. He's going to spend the CP first turn. Most of the other stuff that can be is hidden. Sorta. So when we're looking at profile, so what are we looking for? Obviously, the prime target is going to be fast-moving units that can't really shoot, that are like melee-oriented or whatever. Obviously, if they can shoot the top over you, like, it's still useful to move block them, because maybe then you can prevent them from scoring or whatever, but optimally, you're going to get something with a lot of movement, and that costs a lot of points, and again, is melee only. So Shalaxi is, like, the perfect example, I would say. Stuff you want to be mindful of is melee units. Melee units... and also, on that same token, like slow armies or slow units. Death Guard, for example. I would very much advise against trying to move block Death Guard of all armies. If I was Death Guard and you placed a bunch of Infiltrators 9 inches from my deployment zone, I would freaking thank the stars above that that I'm about to gain the 4 or 5 inch or 6 or whatever inch movement from charging you. And again, that also applies to the melee units. If you were to deploy, the 9 inches away, possessed move 9 inches as it is, so A, you're not really move blocking them. in the first place. Like, maybe prevent them from advancing, but that's really not that huge a deal. But also, too, they're just going to pick up your Nurglings, so that's like a free kill for them, and you basically get nothing out of it. And then lastly, you really got to worry about them gaining movement off of you. So, actually, yeah, let's add some objectives here. So, all right, there we go. There, we got some objectives here. So, if I were to go the 9 inches, so basically, like, right on the edge of this objective right here, and they were to charge me, like I said, they'd pick them up. So at first, oh, they're outside the deployment. No, they get to consolidate in. That would be terrible. Right away, you're like behind. You lose a unit, and you're going to be behind on the score, all because you made a little mistake on how you did that. So, again, be very careful of what units you choose to move block. You don't just always do it. If I was fighting this list, and I saw all this stuff here, so I see, oh, they got a bunch of fly and possessed or, you know, fast melee, but they do got Shalaxi. And let's pretend I only had 3 squads of Nurglings. I would probably, or at least I'd like think about putting 2 of these units in reserve, Deepstrike reserve, and then keeping the last one for Shalaxi in particular. Like I said, never ever ever gift your opponent free movement. You need to be hyper aware of that. In some cases, like with Shalaxi, we'll see in a moment, it'll be kind of hard to block her and prevent the possessed from getting in here, but that's not always the worst thing, depending on how you, like, position and whatnot. This might actually pull them off, so in a sense, it slightly eats up some of their movement, brings them out of position, all of a sudden the center's open or whatever. So, like, there's ways around it, even if, like, you know, you're making the best out of a worse situation, I guess. Speaking of fly units, well, so we'll show how it works. Fly units, too, they are still, in a sense, still blockable. So don't think right away, just because somebody can fly, even if they can fly really far, like a hover flyer or whatever, don't think that you're automatically SOL when it comes to that. So, move blocking, a lot of this stuff will probably be obvious to a lot of us players, but again, this is kind of meant for newer players, so a lot of times it helps to see it, so I figured, you know, let's show you what it'll look like. So for this situation, like I mentioned, Shalaxi's going to be the main target. She moves really far. It's either 14 or 16, so really freaking far. She does incredible amounts of damage. The last thing I want is for her to get up my flank and then start screwing around with all my Forge Fiends and my Hellbrood and all that. That would be terrible. I might have to, like, turn around, like, all sorts of bad stuff. You obviously don't want that to happen. You do need to realize, so if they're non-infantry, terrain, obviously, is going to play a huge role in all this. So in this case, Shalaxi's sort of hemmed in. They sort of didn't pick the best spot, because they're kind of forced to come down this spot here. I don't mind too much if Shalaxi decides to go around this way, because that's basically going to eat up most of their movement, so that's practically like eating a turn. So not the worst thing ever if that happens. So in this case, looking at Shalaxi, she got a pretty big base. She got a pretty big base right there. So I know that, okay, I don't need to be that close to that objective. I could probably go something like that. By the way, I'm not going to worry about measuring these exactly. Playing into the MSU theme I mentioned earlier, how I think you should go MSU, you also get easier and better, like, coherency. You only need to be within 2 inches of one other model. If you went, I believe it's 6 or above, you need to be within 2 inches of at least 2 other models, so you don't really gain that much. You gain a little, but you don't gain that much, like, extra width or whatever, because you'd have to deploy similarly to this. Like, again, you'd get a little bit more out of it, but still, I still think the 40 points for 3 of them, probably the best way to do it. But again, we're measuring, so we'll pretend that's exactly 3 inches. She's not going to fit through there. Bada bing, bada boom. So I'm blocking her. And potentially, I'll play into, it's not the best thing ever, but it'll kind of play into blocking the possessed, / hopefully maybe even screening for my own possessed, depending on how I move them. So what's really good, too, is if you get first turn. If you get first turn, it flips everything on its head. You know, if you could magically, like, know you were getting first turn, like, you would not, I don't think you would deep strike the other units. You would deploy all of them, because obviously what you're going to do on your turn, if you get first, oh, yep, I'm going to move up 5 inches. Suddenly, you only get a 4-inch move this turn. Oh, and by the way, they're Nurglings. I don't want to charge you. I don't want to die on my turn. I want them to die on your turn. That's how this is working. So, of course, I would advance them 2 more inches. Oh, okay, you got a 2-inch move this turn, Shalaxi. And Chosen, and part of the Possessed. Super duper, gets super duper way better if you manage to get first turn, so do bear that in mind. Speaking of, maybe maybe you're playing a skew list that you are like not at all prepared to take on, or you're fighting like a really good general, they've beaten you literally every single game, you really don't think you're going to win, you know, whatever the reason or whatever, you can always throw the Hail Mary. It's, you know, clearly you want to avoid it if you can, because things can go really wrong really quick if you don't get first turn, but it is an option to have out there. You just deploy the 3 squads along the line, pray to God you get first turn, and if you get it, cool, man. You may very well just win the game right there. Being able to hem in, you basically, like, almost an entire army's first turn is just wasted. Especially the melee units. Like, sure, again, they'll pick up your Nurglings. 40 points each, man. I don't care. That's way better than you killing, you know, something actually worthwhile. In regards to fly units, so I mentioned, you know, you're not SOL if there's fly units involved. What you want to do when it comes to fly, so you can't avoid that much movement unless you got multiple units. You could, like, stack them in a certain way. But what you do, you measure their full movement. So 12 inches. If you're worried about them advancing, which usually you won't be, because if they advance, they aren't charging, aren't shooting, usually. But you measure out the 12 inches, and cool, I'm just going to put my Nurglings right there. You can't be within 1 inch, so I'm going to make sure I, like, spread them out decently, and sweet. You just lost a little bit of movement right there, all for me, also again to help screen the objective somewhat. Sadly, Nurglings don't have objective control, but can't win them all, you know. This also applies to flyers, of course, so same deal. You would measure out their 20 inches, and same thing. We put it, you know, make a nice little triangle or whatever you need to do, and cool. He's going to lose a bit of movement, or maybe he doesn't get the line of sight, or maybe just annoy him. So don't think that just because they have fly, you automatically can't do the move blocking technique. It's still a valid strategy to use. On top of move blocking, you got the obvious of screening. So objectives, I think objectives are where you normally want to, like, try to remember this, of course. Certain armies are going to have abilities that let them deep strike within 3 inches or so, or just deep strike in general or whatever. If you can get your, like, maybe you don't even infiltrate onto there, but you just move onto it on your next turn. Maybe they ignore you or whatever the reason. You know, try to get, you know, do your best to try to get it as blocked as you can, or, you know, more commonly, because they're not always going to have that, try to block the front of it. This is, like, obvious stuff, but again, you newer players especially, you guys need to drill in your head objectives. Every single turn, you should start your turn thinking, how can I score, and how can I prevent them from scoring? Those are, like, the first 2 things that should go through your head, then you go through everything else. And then again, like, maybe you did deep strike them, nothing really came up turn 1, your opponent has a bunch of stuff in deep strike, you don't want them coming up behind you or whatever, so don't be afraid. It's not the worst thing. Like, optimally, you wouldn't do this, you'd put them on, you know, you'd go for behind enemy lines or whatever, but it's not the worst thing ever. Only a 40-point unit, super cheap, not the worst thing ever if you have to put them behind you, and maybe that screens your backfield or whatever. So definitely still got a few uses there, even when the deep striking move blocking isn't an option for you. In regards to scoring, so like I sort of mentioned earlier, they don't have objective control, so you can't just drop there and suddenly control this objective. Admittedly, like, it's fair. They're way too cheap, they're way too good, and they'd probably be too expensive. Like, I'd rather them be this cheap than get the objective score, the OC. But that doesn't stop you from scoring secondaries. So I actually laid out the secondaries I think would mostly apply to Nurglings. Most of these are just going to be like, end of your turn, if you're in your opponent's deployment with 2 or more units, you score 5 VP, so a pretty good amount right there. Something, too, that you guys want to know, so alright, let's look, where's a good one for this? Okay, cool. Deploy teleport homers in your shooting phase, so after you deep struck, hopefully. Well, yes. In your shooting phase, so after you deep struck, you can select 1 unit from your army that is not battle shocked and is eligible to shoot. Nurglings don't have guns, though, right? Well, according to the main rulebook and the errata, or the commentary, these guys are still eligible to shoot. The only things that keep you from being eligible, that I'm aware of at the moment, is if you advanced or if you fell back. And even then, if you have some sort of rule that lets you like fall back and shoot, or you got assault so you can advance and shoot, if you got those, you're still freaking eligible. So exactly, something like the deploy teleport homers. So at the end of your turn, if you're within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, or if you're in your opponent's deployment zone, you actually get more VP. So this is even first turn, like, they are fairly well screened. Like, maybe if they know these guys might be coming, they might actually, like, move back instead of trying to score. But even in this scenario, pretty easy to sneak these guys in the corner. And by turn 2, I would hope that something like this would, like, move up at least a little bit. And in that case, if you got a second unit... Let's see. Would that be 9 inches? It'd be a little further. But either way, you'd still get the quarters, or, well, you'd still be in their deployment zone, actually. So, super duper. Keep that in mind, guys. They're still eligible to shoot, even though they don't have guns. That applies to every single unit. Another handy thing that'll come up, not for Nurglings, but this happened with my Raptors, actually. They have pistols. So even if you're locked in combat with another infantry or whatever, you're still eligible to shoot. So long as you're in your opponent's deployment or table quarters or whatever the mission is, you still can get points off that. So ultra valuable. That kind of plays into why I think a lot of times you want to bring 3 units of Nurglings. That way you can play, so turn 2, you play 1 of them, maybe 2 of them, it depends on the situation. But you play 1, get your points. Turn 3, these guys are probably dead by then, most likely. Play another squad off to the other quarter, and you're super annoying. You force your opponent to screen, at least if they want to stop you. And you're scoring points every turn. Crazy powerful, crazy good to have. God, I love Nurglings, man. They're so good. What'll be fantastic, too, a lot of people underestimate Nurglings and, like, how resilient they are, especially if they've never fought for them before. I will say, Nurglings used to be, like, way more annoying. I believe they were, like, in 7th, I think it was. They were, like, -1 to... They had all these crazy rules back then. -1 to hit and all this other stuff. I forget, but I do remember, like, I hated Nurglings back then. Before I played Chaos, I hated them. But, especially with, like cultists or crap units, somebody might not put in enough firepower, and they might not wipe the unit. They might leave one alive, and hot diggity damn, like, that's going to be bad for your opponent, most likely. Speaking of objectives, I do think TAC objectives, the, like, randomized ones, are going to be the most common way of playing, you know, where you, like, draw them each turn. The idea that you can gain command points for ones that you don't really want and wouldn't really care about, very powerful. And also, too, as long as you build your list for it, so you go, like, take all comers or whatever, which is how all your tournament lists should be, unless you have, like, a specific plan in mind. Yeah, definitely think this will be the route. That said, fixed secondaries are still okay. Certain times it could be, like, a no-brainer as well. If it's, like, Chaos Knights and they got a bunch of characters or whatever, yeah, you might want to consider going for Assassinate and bring them down, and I'm not sure what the third one would be, but either way, like, not always will you want to go with the TAC objectives, but usually I think you will. So these ones, I believe there's like 16, and there's already 5 of them. They're pretty good. So over the course of the game, you're like, and you draw 2 each turn, almost assuredly you're going to pull these ones, or at least like most of them, or like half of them, or whatever. As for some other tips that are handy to use, so these won't necessarily apply to, like, Nurglings, really. This is just, like, stuff I wanted to bring up while I was doing this video. For newer players, so deployment might be the most important, like, phase of the game or whatever. I would say it is, in the very least, it's the easiest one to screw yourself. You should almost always, unless you're, like, until you run out of space, or depending on how the board looks, you should always deploy as though you're going second. Unless you're throwing the Hail Mary. Always deploy like you're going second. Don't ever give them easy targets. How the general, like, flow of deployment's going to go for the most part, you're going to put your, like, crap, don't care about units down first, usually. So if I were starting, I would put down cultists, they put down something, I'd put down cultists, they put down something, I put down more cultists, they put down something. But then you do need to take a look at how everything's looking every few units, and potentially even do it early again, depending on how the map looks, and put down an important unit. So these guys, these are undivided, so I don't get the Nurgle stratagem if I were to run these guys. But I need to be careful with how I deploy them. In fact, right here, this is, like, already an illegal deployment, because they're overlapping on the Forge Fiend. But if I had made the mistake of putting down the Forge Fiend first, maybe I even put it like, oh, I left space for my Possess. Oops, didn't leave enough. Now I got to peek out around the edges or whatever. That's terrible. Automatically, a good opponent's going to take advantage of that. You're probably going to lose most or, like, all of your Possessed, and you might have just lost the game there. You just gave up the center. You don't really have the infantry to fight it. Like, all sorts of terrible stuff can happen if you let that happen. So I do think it's important, at least for bigger units, so definitely a 10-man like this. Take a moment every few units, make sure you'll still have room for them. You don't necessarily have to deploy them that second. Like, maybe you do still wait, throw down more crap units or whatever, but make sure you got room for them and room for everything else that's going to come in with them. Because this is pretty common for everything to be cramped in like one little area. So do bear that in mind as you're deploying. Another thing, so I've been doing this a lot lately. When I bring Havocs, which isn't every list, but I do like them a fair bit. When I bring Havocs, I pretty much always deploy them just like this. So in the back corner, it depends on the deployment or whatever, but in the back corner like this. Reason being is the secondary, I think it's Area Denial. Nope, it's Investigate Signals. Basically, anytime you have a unit within 9 inches of the corner of the battlefield, so the way I read is the literal corner, you get units within 9 inches and you score points. So I like to keep them back here because not only can I just move into cover and suddenly I can see the entire fire lane, but also when it comes up, most likely, I can just move back and boom, score. A lot of times 48-inch range with these guys, so still be able to hit what you need to. So that's something else to bear in mind. Again, if you guys are newer, you need to hammer it in your head. How are you going to score? Like, even while you're building your list, you need to think, okay, these guys, these guys don't do shit for damage, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to use them for homers, whatever it is. So, again, hammer it in your head. Something I see a lot of newbies get stuck into, and I myself was super guilty of it, even until not that long ago, is getting in a killing mindset. It's really easy to just try to kill everything possible as fast as possible. Like, all you care about is how much damage, so-and-so unit's gonna do. Nah, man. I mean, like, yes, obviously it's valuable. Obviously that's like half the game or whatever. But again, scoring is what it's all about. I sincerely try to start every single turn. The first thing I think is, how can I score? Second thing I think is, how can I prevent them from scoring? So potentially, like, depending on the situation, I might even just ignore Shalaxi for a turn if it means I can wipe out the Raptors and, like, I don't know, maybe I can charge or move block the Chosen. So, and actually they only have the 6-inch move, but maybe I can find a way to keep them from getting on the objective. Like, that might be more valuable than shooting at Shalaxi or whatever. There are a million freaking reasons that you guys don't necessarily always just want to go for shooting right away. Either way, I didn't want to make this video too long. I just wanted to hit like the main things I thought were important when it comes to Infiltrators and Nurglings in particular. I didn't really touch on the blue horrors too much, but they're an option too. They're actually okay with the 4-up invul. I think they're like fairly resilient. I also like too they do have objective control, so that's a big change actually, because that does mean that you can put them right there. So I do think there's a fair amount of play in blue horrors. They're kind of expensive, but to be honest, it's sort of fair with the Infiltrate and whatnot. Sort of fair, especially with the invul and all that. Anyways, I hope this was useful, guys. As always, if you have any suggestions or anything else to add, I'd love to hear it. Legit, if you have some good like tips or advice, not only for this, but for anything else, like, I will put in the videos. I'll even credit it to you or whatever. I really want to, like, help other people get better. I myself would like to improve, so any way that you guys are able to help with that, I'd love to hear it. Again, if you guys enjoy the content, consider liking and subscribing. I know I say it a bunch, but it does mean a lot to me. It does, like, it helps me want to keep doing this stuff. And by the way, you guys have been so freaking nice and, like, easy to talk to and all that stuff, so I really do appreciate you guys being chill. But, yeah, good luck out there. Let me know if you got any questions, and have a great rest of your night, guys.